Where is it? Why were you the only one handling the numbers yesterday? The sharp voice echoed through the glass-walled conference room, silencing the murmurs of the assembled team. Every eye turned toward Amara, a young woman sitting at the center of the room, holding her tablet like a shield against the sudden storm. The chief financial officer's accusation landed like a hammer. Money had gone missing from the quarterly accounts, millions that no one could explain, and somehow, Amara had become the target. She felt the weight of the room pressing down on her, the sudden shift from respect to suspicion making her stomach tighten. Her colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, whispering under their breaths, and the tension was almost tangible. Friends, strangers, and allies alike now seemed distant, unsure of what to think. For a moment, Amara's mind raced. How had this happened? Why was she being blamed for something she had no control over? Her heart pounded, not out of guilt, but from the shock of being thrown into the spotlight of doubt, watched and judged by those she had worked alongside for years. Before the CFO could raise his voice again, I want to pause for a moment and ask you something. Yes, you watching this story. Where are you watching from right now? Which city? Which country? Take a second to think about it. And if you enjoy stories that reveal the quiet strength of people facing injustice, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button under this video, so you don't miss the rest of this journey. Now, back to Amara. She took a deep breath and spoke carefully, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. I didn't touch the funds. I can show the audit logs, the transaction history. Please, let's check the numbers before making any assumptions. The CFO's eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Assumptions? Amara, these are millions we're talking about, and the logs show that only you had access during that time. Only you. Whispers rippled through the room. Some colleagues nodded uncertainly, others avoided eye contact, and willing to side with her, but too polite to openly agree with the accusation. The tension grew heavier with every passing second, the silence between the words stretching long enough to feel unbearable. Amara's palms were sweaty, but she refused to let them show, refusing to let panic or fear define her. She knew that losing composure would only make her appear guilty in the eyes of those already convinced. Please, let's look at the facts, she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed almost lost amidst the accusation. I have nothing to hide. Let's check every record, every transaction, and we'll see the truth. But the CFO waved her off, dismissing her words with a sharp hand gesture, a mixture of impatience and confidence that he was untouchable. Facts? The facts are clear. Millions are missing, and you were the only one working on the accounts yesterday. There's no need to complicate this. We have to act now. The room went silent again, and the whispers died down, replaced by the sharp focus of everyone present, all waiting to see what she would do next. Amara felt her chest tighten. She wanted to shout, to demand that they stop accusing her without proof, but she held herself back. Instead, she asked another question, trying to redirect the conversation toward reason. Can we review the system logs together? Can we verify the access records? Her words were calm, deliberate, but met only with skepticism. The CFO leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes sharp. You may be calm, Amara, but calm does not erase responsibility. Someone is accountable, and right now, all signs point to you. You have to understand that. Colleagues shifted in their seats, some lowering their gazes, others stiffening as they waited for the confrontation to escalate. It was a moment where judgment seemed almost certain, and Amara felt the full weight of being judged not by evidence, but by perception, by circumstance, by a room full of people ready to believe the worst, because it was convenient. She drew a slow breath, steadying herself against the rising tide of tension. If that is how it looks, she said carefully, then I welcome a full audit. Let every transaction, every authorization, every entry be examined. The truth will show itself. Her voice, though quiet, carried an undercurrent of strength, a signal that she would not crumble even under unjust scrutiny. The CFO's lips tightened, but he said nothing immediately, sensing perhaps that this was not a simple conversation anymore. Across the room, some colleagues whispered quietly, questioning in hushed tones whether this accusation was fair, while others remained still, uncertain, and willing to make waves. The tension stretched on, each heartbeat measured, each glance calculated. Amara felt time slow down, every second magnified, as if the very air had thickened around her. Outside the walls of that conference room, the day continued as usual, but inside, the world had contracted to this single moment of judgment. The logs had yet to be checked, the auditors had yet to speak, and the room's eyes, filled with doubt and curiosity, remained fixed on her. Every instinct in her body told her to panic, to argue, to beg, but she held back, because she knew that only composure could carry her through the storm. And so she waited, calm on the surface, aware of the storm that raged beneath, aware that every word, every pause, every breath mattered in the silent trial unfolding around her. The room had become a stage, and Amara had become both accused and quiet witness to the fragility of perception, where one misstep could define her before any proof could speak for her. The minutes stretched on, and the atmosphere thickened. Outside, emails pinged, calls went unanswered, the world continued to move, but inside, Amara's world had narrowed to the judgment of the eyes around her, the accusation that hung heavier than any weight she had carried before. And still, she breathed, steady and measured, refusing to let panic dictate her actions. She knew the truth was on her side, and that one fact, if discovered, would change everything. But until that moment arrived, she remained in the eye of the storm, alone, yet unbroken, a quiet strength, battling the roar of suspicion, the deafening certainty of accusation. Every glance that flicked toward her, every whisper, every question in the minds of her colleagues, became part of a test of patience, resilience, and the quiet power of standing firm in the face of injustice. And as the room waited, she reminded herself silently, not a word spoken aloud, that the truth would not be rushed, that it would reveal itself in time, and that no false accusation could diminish the value of integrity, not even for a moment. The tension in the conference room did not ease as the minutes passed. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on Amara, waiting, judging, unwilling to intervene or offer support, and she felt the weight of it pressing down on her like a physical force. She knew that one wrong word, one misstep, could make this accusation irreversible in the minds of everyone present. She drew in a deep breath, steadying herself, and spoke again. Her voice measured, deliberate. "We can review every access log, every transaction. The truth will show itself. I have nothing to hide." A few colleagues shifted uneasily in their seats, glancing at one another as if searching for an ally, but no one spoke. The chief financial officer leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes narrowing. "Logs, access records, audits. Do you really think that will clear you, Amara? Millions are missing, and the timing is too convenient. It points to you." The accusation cut through the room like a blade. Amara's mind raced. She thought of the hours she had spent reviewing reports, of the careful attention she had given to each line item, of the fact that she had done nothing wrong. She felt frustration, anger, and fear bubbling beneath the surface, but she kept her voice calm. "If you allow the audit to proceed, it will show that I did not manipulate any funds. Every entry, every approval, every transaction is recorded. We can go step by step, if necessary." The CFO's eyes flicked toward the team, silently challenging them. Some averted their gazes, others whispered to each other, and the air felt heavy with uncertainty. Amara felt the rising pressure, the near suffocating judgment, and yet she refused to let it define her. She knew that composure, more than argument, would be her strongest ally. The team's internal IT specialist, Liam, cleared his throat and spoke cautiously. "We can pull the system logs for the relevant times, review the audit trail. It will take a few minutes, but it should show who accessed what and when." The CFO's lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine, do it. But this doesn't absolve her until the evidence is clear." "Until then, the suspicion remains." Amara nodded, keeping her expression steady, even as her stomach twisted in anxiety. She watched as Liam worked quickly on his laptop, fingers moving deftly over the keys, and felt the room's attention shift from her to the flickering screen. Whispers circled again among colleagues, speculation running through the air, some quietly hoping for her exoneration, others unconsciously reinforcing the narrative of guilt they had already accepted. Minutes passed, and the tension did not lift. The logs were pulled, the timestamps analyzed, the records compared with her access permissions. The numbers and the evidence all pointed to what Amara had known all along. She had done nothing wrong. And yet, the room's eyes did not soften immediately. The CFO fidgeted in his chair, checking the screen impatiently, unwilling to acknowledge the emerging truth. Amara's pulse raced, not from fear this time, but from the anticipation of vindication and the disbelief that it would finally be recognized. Liam, careful and methodical, began to explain the findings. The transactions were not initiated by Amara. The system shows access from a different terminal during the time in question. All approvals were routed correctly, and no unauthorized changes were made. A hush fell over the room. The whispers died down, replaced by a dawning realization among the team. Eyes that had been sharp with judgment now widened with surprise, some faces pale with shock. Amara kept her hands folded calmly in front of her, waiting for the acknowledgement she deserved, though she did not yet let herself smile or relax. The CFO opened his mouth, then closed it, as though the words he wanted to speak were trapped behind a wall of pride and embarrassment. The evidence was irrefutable, and yet he hesitated, unwilling to admit the mistake publicly. The room's energy shifted subtly. The colleagues who had doubted Amara now exchanged glances, a mixture of relief and shame crossing their expressions. Some avoided her gaze, unwilling to confront their earlier assumptions. Liam continued, showing each step of the log review, the chain of approvals, the timestamps, and the verified system entries. Each piece of data reinforced Amara's innocence, leaving no room for argument. Even the most skeptical of colleagues could not ignore what the evidence revealed. Amara exhaled slowly, though no one could see it, keeping her posture straight, her composure intact. The unfair weight of suspicion had not broken her, though it had tested her every thought, every nerve. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only moments, the CEO entered the discussion, reviewing the findings with calm authority. His voice, even and firm, carried through the room. The audit confirms what Amara has been saying. The transactions were handled correctly. No misconduct has been found on her part. The discrepancy originated from a misallocated terminal access. The room was silent, the tension slowly giving way to disbelief and relief. The CFO's shoulders slumped slightly, his face pale, his attempts at authority diminished in the presence of fact. Amara remained seated, breathing steady, the strength of patience and truth evident in her calm demeanor. The colleagues began to murmur softly among themselves, processing what had just occurred, some whispering apologies under their breaths, others silently acknowledging the injustice of their initial judgment. Amara's thoughts were quiet but resolute. She had endured the storm, faced the suspicion, and preserved her dignity. The ordeal had tested more than her professional skills. It had tested her character, her ability to remain steady under pressure, and her courage to trust that truth would eventually prevail. Outside the walls of the conference room, the day continued, but inside, time had stretched, held in suspension by accusation and evidence, tension and patience. Each colleague present had witnessed not just the uncovering of a mistake, but the quiet resilience of a person who refused to be defined by the assumptions of others. The logs had spoken, the proof was clear, and yet the impact of judgment lingered in the room, a reminder of how quickly perception could shift without the guidance of facts. Amara understood that some of those eyes would carry a trace of doubt for days to come, a quiet lesson learned through experience rather than instruction. And still, she remained composed, a quiet pillar of integrity, allowing the revelation to unfold fully, allowing the truth to speak louder than any accusation. The room had been a crucible, testing every reaction, every glance, every whispered judgment, and she had emerged intact, unbroken, though not untouched by the weight of scrutiny. Every colleague now had to reconcile what they had assumed with what was real, every glance at her a reminder that calm reason, evidence, and patience could withstand even the most public and harsh accusations. And Amara, sitting quietly, knew that this was only the moment before the final resolution, the moment before the lesson was fully recognized. But she had already proven her strength, her integrity, and her capacity to endure the storm without losing herself. The evidence was undeniable, the accusations unfounded, yet the room's tension still lingered, a quiet testament to the fragility of trust and the power of patience. She had survived the trial of perception, awaiting the moment when recognition, acknowledgement, and justice would be fully articulated and understood. And in that suspended silence, Amara allowed herself a brief, private sense of satisfaction, knowing that truth, in the end, could not be silenced, could not be ignored, and that her resolve, her dignity, and her unwavering calm had carried her through the storm. The room was heavy with anticipation as the audit results were laid out before everyone. The logs were clear, the numbers undeniable, the access records showing exactly what Amara had insisted all along. She had not touched a single cent that had gone missing, and yet, for hours, she had been under the weight of suspicion, the eyes of colleagues and superiors fixed on her as if waiting for her to falter. The chief financial officer shifted uncomfortably, his composure cracking ever so slightly as the truth emerged. He opened his mouth to speak, but closed it again, unable to produce the justification he had rehearsed, unable to maintain the facade of certainty he had wielded for so long. Around him, colleagues exchanged quiet, astonished glances, some lowering their eyes in embarrassment for the assumptions they had allowed to take root, some whispering apologies, and others simply letting the evidence speak for itself. Amara remained seated, calm, her hands folded, her posture unwavering, her dignity intact despite the storm she had endured. She had felt the pressure of judgment, the suffocating weight of disbelief, and yet she had not let it define her, had not allowed herself to succumb to panic or anger. Each fact presented by the audit had reinforced her innocence, and now, as the final confirmations were spoken aloud, the reality settled in for the room. The CFO, once so commanding, now seemed small, his confidence diminished in the face of undeniable truth. He avoided Amara's eyes, his shoulders slightly slumped, the authority he had wielded moments ago dissipating like mist. The CEO's voice broke the silence, firm and resolute. The audit confirms what Amara has maintained all along. She is not responsible for the discrepancy. The error originated from misallocated system access, not from her work or judgment. Relief rippled through some colleagues, surprise softened by guilt through others, and a quiet recognition of truth settled over the room. Amara allowed herself a slow breath, a private acknowledgement that patience and integrity had carried her through the ordeal. She had endured accusation, whispers, and judgment, but she had not wavered. Her calm had been her shield, her careful adherence to truth her sword, cutting through assumptions and preconceptions. The CFO finally spoke, his voice low, tight with frustration and humiliation. This doesn't change anything I said earlier, he muttered, though his words carried no conviction, no authority, merely the echo of pride bruised. The room remained quiet, the weight of judgment lifted, yet leaving behind the traces of lesson learned the hard way. Colleagues began to nod subtly to one another, a shared acknowledgement that assumptions could be misleading and that truth required patience and evidence. Amara rose slowly, acknowledging the end of the formal discussion, without triumph, without malice, but with a quiet strength that spoke volumes. Her composure, her grace under pressure, had made the statement that no argument, no accusation, no unjust judgment could diminish the value of integrity and character. She walked through the room, her head held high, and felt the subtle shift in the energy around her. Where once suspicion and doubt had dominated, now respect, cautious and perhaps belated, began to take root. The CFO slumped further into his chair, his attempts to maintain dominance fully dissipated. His eyes flicked toward Amara once briefly, with something like recognition, though unspoken, a quiet admission that he had been wrong. Amara's colleagues looked at her with newfound awareness, some silently acknowledging that their judgments had been rushed, influenced more by perception than evidence, by convenience than fairness. The CEO spoke again, firm but measured. At this company, integrity is valued above all. Let this be a reminder that assumptions cannot replace facts and that courage under scrutiny defines true professionalism. The words echoed softly, filling the room with a sense of closure, a sense that justice, when paired with patience and truth, had been served. Amara felt a quiet pride, not in proving others wrong, but in having endured without compromising her principles, having stood firm against accusation, having allowed the truth to reveal itself fully and completely. She realized that true strength was not in defending herself with anger or resentment, but in maintaining composure, integrity, and clarity, even when the world assumed the worst. The colleagues who had been most vocal in their doubts now regarded her differently, respect quietly replacing judgment. The room had shifted subtly, a collective lesson absorbed without a single shouted word, a moral experienced rather than instructed. The CFO finally muttered an apology, tentative and awkward, and Amara nodded, accepting it not out of triumph, but because she understood that closure and dignity mattered more than revenge or satisfaction. The energy of the room lightened as the realization spread that accusation without evidence harms everyone, not just the accused. Amara returned to her desk, her movements calm and deliberate, each step carrying the quiet assurance of one who has faced injustice and remained unbroken. The whispers that had once carried judgment were replaced by soft conversations, tentative respect, and the acknowledgement that patience and integrity had won the day. Outside, the world continued as usual, but within the walls of the conference room, something had shifted. Assumptions had been challenged, biases confronted, and a quiet example of strength, dignity, and resilience had been set before all present. Amara understood that the impact of this moment would linger, that some colleagues would carry the memory of it into future decisions, quietly reminded of the importance of evidence, fairness, and respect. And in that understanding, she allowed herself the smallest smile, not for triumph, but for the knowledge that she had survived, endured, and maintained her truth in the face of doubt. The room was no longer a place of accusation. It had become a space of recognition, of acknowledgement that patience, courage, and integrity mattered more than power, intimidation, or assumption. As Amara sat, calm and unshaken, she felt the quiet victory of justice and truth prevailing, the lesson that dignity endures where pride and prejudice falter. And now, as the day continued, she carried with her the unspoken knowledge that strength is measured not by how loudly one defends oneself, but by the quiet courage to remain true when every eye assumes the worst. Friends, colleagues, and viewers alike, remember that integrity and patience are more powerful than anger and accusation. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button so you don't miss more stories of courage, truth, and justice unfolding in everyday life.